Hello and welcome to Share Talk. I'm Matt Brown. It gives me great pleasure to introduce onto the show today Michael Rosenberg, who is the chairman of Starcom. Thank you very much for coming on today.
My pleasure, my pleasure.
Well, let's start off for our viewers that maybe aren't aware of Starcom. Can you just explain your business, where you operate and what you do?
Okay. Starcom is based in Tel Aviv, Israel, but like a lot of Israeli companies, it's a global business.
Yes.
The founders of that business grew up in the world of the technology of tracking. And they had a business before that which they sold, created Starcom 6 years ago or 7 years ago, IPO'd it, and founded the business on the strength of their knowledge of what I call a Me Too product, which we're all familiar with, which is tracking systems for vehicles and cars. And we've all kind of grown up with that kind of product, we understand that. But with that technology, they felt that they could do a lot more than just do simple tracking. And that's what they've done over the years. They've developed systems that go a long way beyond just a simple knowledge of where a car is or where a vehicle is or where a product is, identifying what's happening in the environment around it, the temperature, the humidity, all kinds of things happening, and the world of telematics, which is the fleet management, frankly, of large fleets around the world, that the owners want to know how the fleet is being operated, how efficient the fuel management is, how honest the drivers are, all of those things. So that's the background, that's how it started, and that's how we've developed.
Understood, and that leads me on. You had an announcement back in August in an RNS, and we can see from the results that a major player has increased their orders by 20%, which is fantastic news. What does that tell you about this organisation and the potential to actually increase sales with this organisation?
As with a lot of companies, you have to sort of arrive at what I call the step change point. We've grown up with a multitude, several hundred, of small companies, small clients around the world, mainly in developing countries, whose attitude towards contracts are somewhat flexible.
Understood. Yeah.
And that's fine. That business grew up on that on that backbone, if you like. But our main objective over time has been to educate the market about the technology and what it can do for much larger companies and bigger companies. And I think this year we've finally managed to cross over from that background of small companies to some quite serious large companies and techie companies who've realized that what we have to offer is something that they actually want and can work with, and are working with us on bespoke products that suit their needs. So the RNS in August was, I think, probably the first example of these public examples, because we've been working on it for some time, of the success of that sort of approach to life. One of those companies called Cropex. It's quite an interesting company. It's a private company based in Israel, but again globally. It addresses the agri-business sector, and they've developed a product which enables a farmer to test the need for irrigation. So it's a kind of little pole that goes into the ground, sends back a signal in terms of the humidity and the need for water, so he can control his irrigation. This is a very interesting product from their point of view, but it's also quite a movable product. So they wanted someone that can at the same time help them identify where it is, what's happening to it in the field. And they approached us, worked with us over a few months, and we've developed a variation on one of our products, which is called Kylos, but it's a variation on that, which will actually address that particular problem. And as a result of that, they placed an order with us. And interestingly, more or less at the same time, another very large European company, which unfortunately we're not allowed to give the name of at the moment, but I think eventually we will, but it's a household name, a big company. And they again have approached us because they're in a multitude of consumer goods and industrial goods, moving stuff around the world. And they were attracted again by our technology, came to us, spent a lot of time in our offices, and in the early part of this year, our team went to their offices, End result, they placed their first order, increased it by 20%, and provided we perform, and they're very, very demanding people, by the way, so we've got to tick every single box about 25 times. Assuming we can do that, which we believe we can, they see us as their partners developing more products over the coming years.
So would it be fair to say, I mean, this is a game changer for Starcom, because you're now looking at a big blue chip company, certainly in North America and Europe potentially. Do you feel that this is now the next stage? This is a big development for Starcom?
It definitely is, and in that context, the thing which excites us, but we have to keep our feet on the ground, is that, just a bit of history, about a year and a half ago, there was a tender which was put out by what I call a sister company of the United Nations, based in Vienna. I think they're the peacekeeping force that runs around the place. And they wanted to use, they put out a tender which was to provide, to procure a vehicle tracking system that didn't just rely on the GPS signal, but could actually link to a satellite signal, because in areas of conflict, either because they don't want to be tracked or because they want a different way of tracking, they want to have an ability to do that. Not many companies in the world do this. There are a few. We're one of them. And we won that tender. It was a small one. It was only for about $600,000 or $700,000, which was fine with the recurring income. But then, having tested it in the field, they came back and bought more. And they bought more since.
Super.
So that was a real feather in our cap. And flowing from that, the United Nations in America has put out a tender for a very substantial amount, and we're talking several millions. It's been going on for a year. We've just finished a pilot in the fields, actually, in Africa. And what we do know is that we're in the sort of top 3 contenders worldwide for this tender. Now, we may not win, but what it demonstrates to me is that we are being taken very seriously against some very large companies.
Fantastic. Well, good luck with that tender. And as is the world, there's now a lot more legislation with regards to transportation of goods and how they're monitored, especially dangerous goods, and moving those around the globe. When you look at pharmaceuticals and perishable goods and certainly high-value goods, how does that play into your hands? One assumes that's a benefit to Starcom if further legislation happens.
It's definitely a benefit, and it's beginning to happen. The curious thing from my point of view is that, as I said, we grew up with this sort of standard tracking system for cars and vehicles, and it was a bit of a mystery to me when I first got involved with the company as to why this wasn't being used in the world of shipping or logistics and containers. You think of the tens of thousands of containers which are being shipped around the world, and much to my amazement, very few of them had any kind of tracking system. Some did, but very few. And you can understand it for low-value goods, cotton wool or whatever, who cares if the container goes missing. But for the kind of goods you're talking about, which are either high-value, perishable, valuable in all kinds of sense. So we developed this product, Tetis, which addresses that issue. Doesn't just track where the container is, tracks what's going on inside the container, the humidity, the temperature, the light. I mentioned light only because apparently one of the ways in which people break into containers is to cut a hole in the roof. So as soon as the light comes in, it sends off a signal.
Fantastic.
Now that's beginning to happen. It's still slow, but it's beginning to happen. And interestingly, over the last few months, Maersk, you know, the people who big shipping, have announced that they developed a product of their own for their own particular containers, which I think is great because that just shows there's a need. And kind of flowing from that, we were approached by quite another large shipping company who have been conducting trials with us, and so far they've ticked all the boxes.
Superb. And in the last few RNSs, you state you expect the second half of 2017 and into 18 that you'll see significant improvements in terms of sales and qualities of orders, and you've already intimated that with regards to some of these blue chip companies and tenders. Can you elaborate on these to give us some guidance on potential for growth? now we're kind of 5 years on from the IPO, and what investors and potential investors can potentially expect over the next, let's say, 12 to 18 months from Starcom.
Well, obviously, as you well know, I can't give figures because I'm not allowed to.
Of course.
I always think that's rather strange, by the way, but in a private company you would. In a
Yes.
public company, of course, you can't. I can only give a sort of sense of where we expect to find ourselves. And as we've moved up from this sort of level 1 to level 2 of business, I think that what I can see is that first of all, the quality of business, but also the volume of business is unquestionably growing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we did roughly $5.1 million of revenues last year. We expect, as I've said publicly, to comfortably beat that this year. I can't give you a figure, but I could say we're pretty confident that we're going to comfortably beat that. Not just in terms of the top line, but also last year our margins were roughly 38%, thereabouts, gross margin. This year we're looking around about 45 plus, so we've improved that. The other thing which of course is relevant to the nature of our business is that a chunk of our business is recurring revenue, which is really, I think, is really important. Every time, not every time, but in most occasions when we're selling products, we provide the software that helps to drive those products forward into the future. So we provide that service, and we get anything between $1 and $2 and sometimes even $3 per month per unit. So that creates recurring revenues. Last year, from memory, I think our recurring revenues were about 1.8 million out of the 5, and we see that growing slowly.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Well, it sounds like a positive growth story. All I can say is Michael Rosenberg from Starcom, thank you so much for joining us today. Please check out the stock. It is listed on AIM, and if you have any other questions, then please direct them towards Share Talk. But in the meantime, Michael, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure, thank you.